This is with respect to Caridoc workers. They're saying that they've been served with layoff notices. By the way, this is entire confusion as to what is furlough versus layoff. There seems to be that confusion as well.
But I mean, both reports more or less imply that it's a temporary arrangement. They will be going home. One report basically says they will not be paid. They will be gone until about August. So I think it's 3 months, right? And there's a stipulation that they are not allowed to seek to earn money elsewhere during the period. They basically have to go home and not get paid. And I'm not entirely sure how that works. But then now, again, one of the papers reported that the workers are claiming it is basically union busting. They are getting represented by the Seamen and Waterfront Trade Union, and they have only now been authorized. I believe the government recently bought the dry dock. They have now been authorized for this union to negotiate on their behalf, and they're claiming that this is getting in the way of any such negotiations because they have members who are in their 60s and 70s who don't have any sort of pension plans, and there are a lot of situations like that that they would like to rectify. Meanwhile, they're on furlough and can't earn anything because I believe management is saying, well, look, the financial position of the company is just bad.
Okay, let's get this understanding. It's temporarily laid off, right?
Furlough, that's
for 90. No, well, this can't be furlough because it has to be in a sense. I don't know how the legality of this was temporarily laid off, because furlough means you're allowed to continue working once the transition is actually taking place. So I don't know if furlough and being laid off is the same thing in TNT, but generally speaking, as it applies to labor and labor laws, furlough means you're allowed to continue working during a company's transition. This is actually being laid off, but for 90 days. So how is that applicable? And they're saying that they're not going to be paid. Is that what is being stated according to the letter that they received?
Yes. So I guess in this case, they're using the version of suspension. And look, during the pandemic, I had friends who were furloughed from their job, right? In tourism and in tourism industry. I know a few people outside my family, and they more or less had to deal with the fact that not only were they not getting paid, I believe, right? I perhaps it could be up to the employer, right? It's not as though I have.
Well, again, furlough means you're allowed to work while the company is going through a transition.
But the point is too, it's like, look, you are not working for us right now, so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you ain't getting paid.
Could somebody clarify this for Sean and I? Is it suspension? What's the difference between being suspended and temporarily laid off? Like, I'm confused on this.
Apparently, in some jurisdictions, it's suspension or discharge of a worker on account of economic conditions or shortage of work. So we saw it in the pandemic, and now this company,
but according to
Dockyard, is saying.
According to the workers, they will be temporarily laid off for 90 days from June 1st to August 30th. Mm-hmm. And they are now actually afraid of possible job losses, which I could understand, by the way.
Yeah, that's the next step.
Yeah, because if the company is saying that, given the financial situations and difficulties that they're in, economically right now, this has to happen. So, I mean, is this the first step to them actually being permanently?
One of the things that was reported to have said is that the workers are pointing to other similar companies and facilities who I believe don't have a dry dock that's getting work to do maintenance on ships or something to that degree, something in that field. And the point is their own is not getting business, and the worker is questioning, well, why is it that the competition, like our neighboring competing companies, are getting business and we aren't? So, of course, that there could be a lot of reasons for the why with regards to an answer like that.
One of the other things to consider is that the floating dock was actually sinking. So infrastructurally, it had to be repaired. Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Morris is making the argument that before the government acquired the dock, they should have been very much aware as to its conditions, as to its infrastructure, so that workers could continue to do their jobs while the dock is being repaired. I agree that, listen, as a businessman, the very first thing that I'm going to do is analyze my risk. In any business that you get
Yeah.
to, there's going to be risk. But if I see that there's so much work to be done, especially as it relates to the infrastructure, I might think 3, 4, 5 times about it. So I understand that the government should have considered it. So the question that we should ask is whether or not they actually did. You know, because now that it was actually sinking, it means it was at a terrible stage. And now, because of the government having to repair it, in terms of the infrastructure, that's part of the reason why 90 days they should be home.
Right, and isn't this a company that was recently just bought over?
Not too long ago, yeah.
Not too long ago. So now, what is the reason for that purchase? If you purchased a company in severe financial difficulty, I understand that there's always a social dimension where, look, you will try to keep a company open so that you don't lose your jobs. But in this case, if you're going to have to furlough employees within your first year, you're not really achieving anything if that was the motivation. I don't know if because they own the dry dock, maybe perhaps there was something about the capabilities that we needed either for the ferry or for the Coast Guard.
The other side of it too is that according to Mr. Morris, workers are beyond the age of 65, even in their 70s, and they continue to work because prior to the government's acquisition, they never had a pension plan or retirement security. Crikey.
So all that's up in the air. All that's up in the air, but this is not like other situations where maybe I could speculate by reading some of the tea leaves on how they communicate. You could see explanations for both sides, and we haven't necessarily heard much. This is not like our ongoing labor disputes. This is something that's kind of, well, to some extent, publicly.
Well, the line minister is Rohan Sinanan, so let's see if he responds to this maybe today, tomorrow.
And I do wonder if we needed or we wanted the capabilities that, the dry dock provided, but something went wrong. And I don't know what necessarily the plan is. It would be sad to think that
let me ask you
due
a
diligence
question.
is not something.
Do you think unions are honest when disseminating information? And when I say honest, you don't necessarily have to speak untruths, but you can be misleading.
Well, I think all negotiation, whether it is a lawyer speaking on behalf of their client in court or whatever, there will be some degree of editing or framing or however you put it. To whatever degree it's ethical or not, I don't know. I'm not in that position. Now, with regards to unions, however, I feel as though there is some unions, the ones that are in the papers a lot, that say more or less the same thing all the time, but the same demands all the time. To some extent, I have a hard time trusting those unions. But then, of course, you have private sector unions. You have, it's...
Not to go deeper. Not to go deeper or further and take away from the conversation. But think about this question. We have to go to a break. But what's the difference between a union and a political party?
I think with regards to a public sector union, not much. And we've had this discussion before, but for all intents and purposes, not much. How many union leaders turned out into politicians in TNT?